What's going on, guys? Brian and I here for Rewind number 28, ECW One Night Stand 2005. Now, before we get into the show, I'd like to take the time and run through some reminders. First being that if you have not heard last week's show, Rewind number 27, WWE One Night Stand 2008, be sure to check it out. We had a lot of fun doing that one, and we believe you guys out there, the fans of professional wrestling, will enjoy that one as well, especially if you're fans of that time period. That show's definitely for you. And, of course, this program here is Rewind number 28, but looking forward to the remainder of the month. Say the remainder of the month like we're like halfway through or anything, but I mean we're still in the beginning here. We have our NXT TakeOver In Your House review and recap coming your way tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We also have next week, Sunday, June 14th at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. We will have Rewind number 29, WWF King of the Ring 1998, featuring the semi and final matchups of the 1998 King of the Ring tournament, as well as the famous Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and Mankind. And in the main event of the show, we have Kane facing Stone Cold Steve Austin for the WWF Championship in a first blood match where if Kane doesn't win the title, he will set himself on fire. Then next Monday, June 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we will have our official review and recap of WWE Backlash 2008. Featuring Braun Strowman defending the Universal Championship in a 2-on-1 handicap match against both The Miz and John Morrison. Drew McIntyre versus Bobby Lashley for the WWE title.
Cameron. We are going to have the greatest wrestling match ever. Flair and Steamboat, get the fuck out of the way. Okay? Like every other great wrestler, Sting, any of them, move. Because you know what? 40-year-old Edge and Randy Orton are going to put on the greatest wrestling match ever.
Yeah. Forget Okada and Omega.
Yeah,
who needs that? Yeah, one-on-one in a straight-up wrestling match. The 11-time world champion, the Radar superstar Edge, against the Apex Predator of the WWE, Randy Orton.
In a straight-up wrestling match.
The greatest wrestling match ever.
The stipulation, it's a straight-up wrestling match.
That'll be fun. You know, that idea you had where they hit that RKO and they just like pin him out of nowhere. You know what? That actually might be that would be great. And Orton takes that. He's like, that was the greatest wrestling match ever.
Orton gets the RKO 10 seconds into the match, pins Edge 1, 2, 3, and then he grabs the mic. That was the greatest wrestling match ever.
That would be funny. That would be a troll. But you know what? I actually could see that happening, believe it or not. Not saying it will. I mean, it could be a really good match. Don't get me wrong, but
Vince would be laughing his ass off if that was the finish.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
He'd find that so funny. Like, just like...
I would find that even funny, probably.
He'd be like, they thought they were going to get a good match.
Well, you see the graphic and everything for the show, and it says the greatest wrestling match ever and stuff, but I'm actually starting to get the feeling that there's a good chance it actually could be the main event.
Oh, geez, I thought you were going to say I'm getting the feeling it's going to be the greatest match ever.
Oh, come on now. I'm better than that. No, it could be a really, really good match. It's just the problem is like when you call it the best match ever, it's like anything. Like it could be a great match. It could even be like a 5-star match theoretically. Not saying it would be, but say it was. Even then, it would still probably not be good enough to be the best match.
The greatest match ever is going to be in front of no fans at Backlash.
I know it's going to be in front of the students at the Performance Center. Which, don't get me wrong, that is 10 times better than nothing at all being there, having some, like, noise.
Like, you tell you what frustrates me about the whole thing. Just a little bit. Why is Backlash not right after WrestleMania?
Yeah, because that's the Backlash from Mania.
It's the Backlash from Money in the Bank now.
You know, but it's like, why couldn't they just do Money in the Bank, like, here? Like, that would have been, like, so much better.
I don't know. But maybe they don't want Money in the Bank and SummerSlam to be so close together because they're both big pay-per-views.
I I guess, but I mean, there's always July. I mean, there's something in between July.
That's true.
Like
Let's just get to One Night Stand.
I think Extreme Rules is supposed to be after this, but
yeah, it is.
But that's also not all, folks. Coming up on June 21st, we have Rewind number 30, and for that, we'll be doing WWE Fatal 4-Way 2010. An odd choice, I know, probably for some, but we're going to be going back like 10 years. I mean, 2010, something. That's like 10 years removed from this show.
I'm trying to think. I can't even remember who won the world titles from those shows. Wasn't it? I know Sheamus won one because of Nexus, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't remember who. Did Ray win the world title? I don't remember.
Yes, he did actually.
Okay.
I guess even if we don't completely remember, that's fine because, we go back and, I mean, there's stuff that we've gone back and watched during this, which I didn't completely remember. So some of the stuff is also like learning experiences. I mean, not that like a 2010 show would be, like a learning experience for us because that was like part of our time growing up as fans as well.
Yeah,
but for that show, the main title matches were Fatal 4-Way matches. So for one, we'd have Jack Swagger go up against CM Punk, The Big Show, and Rey Mysterio for the World Heavyweight Championship. Then in the other, it would be John Cena versus Sheamus versus Randy Orton versus Edge for the WWE Championship. And then for the final rewind of June 2020, we'll be headed back to the year 2008 once again, this time for rewind number 31, WWE Night of Champions 2008. In that one, as you guys, I think you know the deal. Every match is a championship match, at least for this particular one. Later on, that wasn't completely the case because I think they didn't have as many titles after all this time. So then they're like, oh, okay, so we got to throw something else in there. But in that one, we'll be seeing a couple intriguing matchups, in particular, one being Edge versus Batista for the World Heavyweight Championship and John Cena versus Triple H for the WWE title. There'll be other matches on there as well that are pretty solid, but those are just like the two main ones, I'd say for sure. And all that remains for the month of June, part one of our summer lineup. And then also a quick reminder, follow JNC Radio on Spotify if you listen to the show through Spotify. Be sure to follow our show page on there. And then if you're an Apple user and listen to the show through Apple Podcasts, be sure to subscribe to JNC Radio on there as well. If you use both Spotify and Apple Podcasts, follow us and subscribe to us on both. Why not? Do both. Help us out if you could, please. And then also JNC Radio is available on all platforms, including the two I just named, as well as Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podchaser. You name it, we're on it. If not, let us know and we'll do our best to try and fix that. I think that pretty much covers all the reminders. But before we get into One Night Stand 05, let's go back and do something that we do in every rewind, and that's give some backstory as to how this event all came together. So yeah, we have backstory for One Night Stand 2005.
Not really any feuds, more of like how the show came together.
Yeah. There's a little storyline, not like, feud, like no feuds or no prior programs or anything, but we'll get into it right here. So following the success of the rise and fall of ECW DVD, Rob Van Dam would approach none other than Vince McMahon himself and suggested WWE should run an ECW reunion show, also considering the fact that at the time there were plenty of former ECW alumni on the WWE roster. And although the build for the pay-per-view itself had begun in May, it had been in the works for quite some time behind the scenes. Tommy Dreamer and Paul Heyman would both put together the show, and Tommy would be put in charge of recruiting the ECW originals to take part in the show. The first time this event would be publicly confirmed by the WWE was through a Dish Network magazine in March of 2005. Not going to obviously get into the details of the show just yet because we haven't gotten to that part yet, but following One Night Stand, reportedly many people backstage were very happy with the way that the show went, with many of the stars of ECW's past describing it as a very fun event. Many stars that would appear on this night had already been announced in weeks prior, but none of them had received any kind of build whatsoever on WWE's main programs, Monday Night Raw or SmackDown. Instead, WWE would go with an invasion angle approach instead. The invasion angle would begin on the May 9th, 2005 edition of Raw. This is, an invasion angle in terms of like the ECW guys getting involved and appearing and things like that, not like the invasion angle of 2001 with WCW. Just want to make that clear. I'm pretty sure we'll talk about that one day and have some fun with that. But the invasion angle would begin on the May 9th, 2005 edition of Raw, where General Manager at the time, Eric Bischoff, would, in response to the announcement of the One Night Stand pay-per-view, say he would squash ECW like a bug. Then the next week on Raw, the May 16th show, Actually, no, this is the main 9 show. The main 16 show we're not at yet, but Tajiri would face Chris Benoit in an Extreme Rules match. Both guys, of course, were ECW originals, and during that, Bischoff would come out and stop the match. He'd also announce that anything related to ECW was banned from Raw, and he'd vow to destroy ECW with the help of other talent from Raw at the One Night Stand pay-per-view. Then the next week on the May 16th show, here we are, Eric Bischoff would plan to hold a funeral for ECW, but that would be interrupted by Vince, who would share his support for the idea of bringing back the Extreme promotion, along with his financial interest in it as well. As this was all going on, Paul Heyman would then make an appearance. So here you would have all 3 promoters and Vince McMahon for the WWF back in the day, but WWE here. You'd have Eric Bischoff, who was the past promoter of WCW, along with Paul Heyman, who back in the day was the longtime promoter of ECW. All sharing.
Just a really cool thing to see.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was quite the image to see, all sharing the same ring together at the exact same time. Paul Heyman would then say to Vince that he didn't own ECW, he just had control of it. And then the Bischoff Heyman would welcome Eric's group of invaders from Raw to One Night Stand and say that you may light a fire that you can't put out. And then Paul would then take a lighter and set the ECW wreath that was in the ring for the funeral on fire. And then the next week on Raw, at this point, we're at the May 23rd edition in 05. Chris Benoit would face Tajiri in another Extreme Rules match, with Benoit picking up the win with the Crip Warriors crossface. Then fast forwarding to the following week, Benoit would then be placed in a tables match to go up against Edge. During that, Benoit would have Edge in position on top of a table looking to hit the diving headbutt, but Lita would move Edge off of it and out of the way. And then from there, several Raw stars would be sent out to beat down on Benoit. And then Edge would lift Chris up for a powerbomb and would hit him with it, putting him through the table for the win. Now, we spent some time discussing what had taken place on Raw leading up to One Night Stand 2005, but we hadn't gone into anything that had taken place over on SmackDown. And then on the May 26th episode of SmackDown, Kurt Angle would talk on the microphone about how ECW was a low-class promotion, and that he'd be taking part in the invasion of the WWE stars going to One Night Stand as well, and that he'd also say that he'd be taking volunteers from SmackDown to go with him as well. Then on the next week's episode, JBL, John Bradshaw Layfield, would announce that he'd be joining Kurt in invading the pay-per-view. And then Angle on the same night would try to recruit someone else to join him and the SmackDown stars invading, that being the brand's color commentator at the time, Taz, who famously had made his professional wrestling career being a part of Extreme Championship Wrestling. Despite now at this point being here, I guess you could say, a WWE guy here, Taz would stick to his old roots with ECW and decline Kurt's offer to join him and the other SmackDown stars invading the pay-per-view. Kurt would not take Taz's rejection lightly and would then hit him over the head with a microphone, sparking one of my all-time favorite lines from Michael Cole. "Come on, what are you, an idiot?" And then Kurt would
sometimes even Cole does a good job on commentary.
That made me laugh, though. It's like, "Come on, what are you, an idiot?" I don't know why it's so funny to me. I just had to put that in there. Then Kurt would grab a chair and then presumably hit Taz in the head with it. I say presumably because that what was being implied there. You couldn't actually see Kurt actually hitting him in the head with the chair. Then on the final Raw before One Night Stand, Chris Benoit would face Snitsky, who was one of the people who had interfered in the tables match he had with Edge in the previous week. And in another Extreme Rules match, God, Benoit's just doing all these Extreme Rules matches here, which Benoit would pick up the win after hitting the diving headbutt. And also on the show, we'd see some of the ECW originals make an appearance to close out the show. Those originals included the Dudleys, who hadn't been seen on TV in several months. They'd arrived with Heyman, Rhino, Balls Mahoney, Axel Rotten, the Sandman, and Tommy Dreamer, who would enter through the crowd. And then they'd all come down to the ring and fight with the Raw Invaders and clean house. During this time period, Chris Benoit would be drafted over to SmackDown, so then on the final SmackDown before One Night Stand, Benoit would face JBL in the main event of the evening. He'd also have a backstage confrontation with his longtime good friend, Eddie Guerrero, which would set up a match for Sunday's pay-per-view event. So that's like the only match, I guess, that had any kind of like little thing that led to any kind of advertisement whatsoever. The ECW Originals would be at ringside for this main event in support of Benoit, while JBL's Cabinet, Orlando Jordan, the Basham Brothers, along with Carlito, Matt Morgan, and Kurt Angle, would also be at